Hello there, I'm Jo Baldwin-Trott and welcome to the Being Fine weekly call that we have on Facebook Live, which is streamed to YouTube. So thank you for watching, thank you for watching later, whatever you're doing while you're watching or listening, we really appreciate you being here. So I'm the editor of the Being Fine book and I am thrilled tonight to have three authors. One obviously right by me. This isn't like, a mirage. This is one of my female authors. There are three female authors in the book Being Fine out of the 16 authors. But also, as well as Maria Contreras, who is here with me now. Thank you for coming.
Hi, thank you.
Good to have you here.
Thank you.
We also have Kapil Gupta from London. Hi, Kapil.
Hi guys.
Great to have you here. And Steve McDermott from Leeds.
Hello.
Heyo.
Heyo.
So, not very good accents. So, thanks for
Not
joining
duck,
us.
no love.
Love, all right.
Love.
Sorry.
Chuck.
That's Lancashire duck.
Is it? Okay.
Oh, crikey, let's not start on English accents, otherwise we'll be here all night.
No.
So, very thrilled that we're having this call tonight on the eve of International Men's Day. It's such an important day that started in the UK actually, and they got such momentum behind it. They decided to make it international because it wasn't to start with, obviously. But it felt like a really special evening to share, and thank you for watching. I know we've already got some live viewers, so we really appreciate that. Our guest author, who hasn't shared his story yet with us on one of these lives or on our videos that are all available on YouTube, is Mark Pitcher. So we're hoping Mark Pitcher is going to pitch up. There we go. That wasn't bad, was it?
Good,
That
that
was amazing. And she hasn't even had a drink.
No wine yet. So hopefully he's going to come along. And but he has an incredible story, which I will go on into if he doesn't come along. But I'm going to wait. Hopefully he'll turn up and he can share it with you himself. So we've just been talking about obviously International Men's Day, what's going on at the moment. The day is focused on supporting men and obviously boys and looking after the men that need help and need support, and raising awareness that women generally do get help and reach out for help in a slightly better, more easier way. They find it easier than men. And obviously with Kapil and Steve, they've written incredibly powerful chapters about why they didn't share their worries and fears and what happened when that didn't happen. So, but we're going to start with obviously the most recent figures coming out from the BBC today, that actually, because of this current situation, because we are going into winter in the UK, sadly, the rate of depression and mental health issues has gone through the roof in the UK. We're looking at 4.2 million people at the start of November being identified as feeling lonely, either always or often, which is just horrible to think of, that many people that are sat at home by themselves and feeling like they've got no one. But obviously we can be lonely when we're in a terrible relationship or if we're in a situation that we don't feel happy in. But those are the figures. And as Steve was saying, I'm going to ask him about that now. Obviously there's a big proportion of people that are younger that are feeling lonely and struggling with their mental health. So hi Steve, great to have you here.
Hello.
So you mentioned this earlier, so I'm going to just give you a moment to talk about this and what your thoughts on this kind of horrid fact that we've had today.
Well, yeah, quite a lot of the news stories, there's at least, if you go on to the BBC news site, you can get all the stats on this, because stats will tell you one thing. So a big theme today that I saw was all about, all about loneliness. And there were two distinct groups that the BBC identified. So there's the sort of, if you like, perhaps the obvious group, which is the group that you may think this book is aimed at, right? Which is maybe single older men. So we know that people of my I'm going to speak for myself now. When I say my generation, people over 60 are particularly poor at talking about their feelings and their mental health, hence the title of the book. So if you ask a bloke over 60 from north of England, are they okay? Regardless of what's going on between their ears, they'll go, yeah, I'm fine. So that's one of the things we want the book to help with, right? So there was two things that caught my eye. So there's one guy, and check this out on the BBC. The heading for the news piece was "The Man Who Talked to Chairs."
Yeah.
The man who talked to chairs, because he was so lonely. So he used to be, I think, a heavy goods driver, and he'd been made redundant during the first wave of COVID. I think he was either divorced or on his own. So he was in a small flat on his own with no job, very little income, and literally found himself talking to a chair. And there was a brilliant group started that he found out about, which is for men of that age group, where they can get together and just chat. And again, they go and repair bikes and stuff. And interestingly, although for me, the group started as avoiding loneliness, I think it's actually expanded into actually mental health as well, because they get to go as blokes. And you'll know, Joe, because it's been like herding cats with your male authors. I'm sure Maria will be much better, but getting us to do all the things you want us to do on social media and all the rest of it, right? Because we communicate in a different way. And Kapil can probably touch again on this. Because they've got something as a focus, like let's repair bikes and make them available. Whilst they're doing that, of course, they're having really valuable conversations about their mental health and the loneliness. So that struck me. But I think there's another forgotten group, which is young people that are lonely. Because I think, again, just like mental health is misunderstood, I think we think people who are lonely are elderly. And that's simply not true either. So if you think about all these poor students, I've just been watching a bit of the news tonight, and they're doing the whole thing about how we're going to get all these students back home from university for Christmas, and they're having to introduce a massive testing program and all the rest of it. But if you're somebody who's just left home for the first time and you've been stuffed in a halls of residence in a room, a tiny little box room on your own, trust me, you're going to be lonely. And there's a good chance your mental health will suffer as well. So I think there's that sort of 16, 18 to 25-year-old group that's rocketed as well during this challenge. So again, I'm passionate that the book can help with both those groups. So don't just think old blokes from Yorkshire can benefit from this, but I think young, lonely people can too.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously students have been identified as a very vulnerable group anyway, especially male students, because it is easy to feel lonely being surrounded by people, day in, day out, but actually, studying in a new place, working desperately hard, all that pressure can really take its toll. And sadly, males of that age are very, very vulnerable, aren't they? So really interesting. I want to bring it back to the first point and the first group you mentioned about the fact that these older men of your age group, but you're a young 62 now, Steve, aren't you? But that age group are very vulnerable, and there aren't many opportunities for men of that age group to get together. But one thing that I love hearing about, Kapil, you're doing this. Simon Walker, I think, is watching. He is doing this as well. We're offering peer support groups, circle time, focused for men, and Simon's model is all about carpentry work, because you mentioned that actually having something to do and focus on allows, and obviously he comes from a building background. But Kapil, can you talk about, because you run these wonderful men's groups which allow these open conversations in a trusted place where men can really show up as vulnerable. So can you share what your thoughts are on that and why that's so important?
Yeah, I think first thing I would say is that I think the 4 million figure is probably quite low. My gut feel is that it's probably way higher than that. And partly because I think, generally speaking, men find it hard to connect, especially around our feelings and emotions. And I'm generalizing it, I'm aware of it, but I think women find it much easier to connect, and especially around sort of openly sharing feelings and connections and that kind of stuff. But men are traditionally conditioned out of it. So we, as men, like to connect about our performance, about like how good we are doing or how well we've done on something. And, apologies. Something happening in Hackney.
Okay.
There's always something happening here. And so my experience has been, and that was probably not the same with me in a way that I've always been very sporty. So I have had connections with men in that way, but never really, I wasn't very comfortable sharing my emotions and feelings always with men. And so on my personal growth journey, I learned to open up and kind of like started becoming going to men's groups, and they really helped me. They've been really healing for me to just like sit with a group of men and talk about our relationships, about how we feel on a day-to-day basis, how uh, you know, men are we think that men are very good at bragging, but I find that it's rare. Men do not celebrate their wins. We are very hard on ourselves. We're always like, oh, I could have done better. Apologies for all this background noise.
Don't worry, it's fine.
We can still hear you.
We can still
Oh,
hear
you can
you.
hear me. Okay, cool. So I have had experiences where men come for men's groups for once, and just by seeing how other men open up with their feelings and emotions, they find it hugely healing. Um, and I also run a talk series called Man Up Talks, Uplifting Talks for Men, and we've run 3 events so far before COVID started, and it's been amazing. I think, and even in that, I would say like 40 to 50% of our audience has been women who want to come and talk about why men are struggling and why they can't open up and share their feelings and emotions, which is really interesting. I find that anytime we talk about men's work, there's more women interested in it than men. Um, so I feel that's probably the thing, that we don't find it easy to connect or share our emotions. Oh, hey, Mark, our main speaker is here, so I'll keep it short. So, and yeah, so I think I've been running men's groups for last sort of 7 years or so. And at the moment, during the lockdown, during COVID, I've been running a weekly men's group on Tuesday evenings. And usually you have 7 to 10 men show up, and it helps me as well. Like, I love connecting and being in a group of men and just talk about everything. But it's such a different feeling to just be with a group of men and talk about it than a group where men and women both are involved. I don't know how to explain it, but it is really very different. And I will encourage any man who's never been to a men's group to actually try it. There's a lot of men's groups at the moment in the UK and globally. So definitely recommend trying a men's group or few.
Yeah, definitely. And it's a time to do it, isn't it? Because there are lots available, and they're very open, and a lot of them are free. And it's just, you just try them until you find the one that works for you. And thankfully, everyone's getting better online, aren't they? So thank you, Kapil. That's really interesting. I'm just going to give a big, very warm welcome to Mark Pitcher. Hi, Mark.
Hi everyone.
Hey, Mark.
Thanks for joining us. Great to see you.
Yeah, great to be here. Thank you. Sorry, I used to be online every day, and I've been offline for about 6 months. So I've gone all tech phobic again, trying to find the links and all that stuff. I'm thinking I should know how to do this by now.
Don't worry. It's great to see you. We're really glad to have you. Mark, obviously meet Maria, who you haven't met before.
Hi, Maria.
Kapil and Steve. So fantastic for you guys, the 4 of you, to meet, as you're all authors of this amazing book that will be coming out next month called Being Fine, the Other F Word. So Mark, we've just been talking about the horrid, but probably, as Kapil highlighted, probably very low estimates of the amount of people in the UK that are feeling lonely right now. And
I've been listening to you. Yeah.
Oh, really? Oh, thank you. Oh, yeah, because you're on Facebook. Yeah.
I've been listening to you madly pressing buttons at the same time.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, so we were just sort of discussing that, and obviously, sadly, that there are so many people that are feeling lonely right now. And just to put that in context, about a month and a half ago, I went onto LBC, and they were doing a segment on loneliness. The segment before was on COVID and certain part of COVID, and they had loads of men ring in, and it was a really heated discussion. They then flipped to the segment about loneliness. It started with Esther Ranson talking about why she thinks elderly people are lonely. And then they asked for obviously call-ins and texts and everything. In that hour of the show on LBC on a Saturday, not one single man contacted the show. No text, no tweets, nothing, not one single call from one single man. So just leave that one in the ether for now. But that just highlights the fact that, you know, sadly, so many men just struggle to admit that they're feeling lonely. But Mark, we're really thrilled to have you tonight. It's International Men's Day tomorrow. And obviously, it's not just men, it's boys, it's just looking after men and raising awareness. And sadly, you have had a horrid, terrible loss in your life when you tragically lost your son to suicide. So share, if you'd like, just a little bit or more about what your chapter will be and what you'd like to share with us tonight.
Yeah, happily. Thanks for having me again. Hi, Steve. Nice to meet you. Maria Kapil, great to see you again. So, yeah, it's funny actually. I having spoken quite publicly about my story and perhaps over the last couple of years, but this year haven't really. It's the first time since March, really, COVID. And so perhaps for those that don't know me, never met me before, you know, no idea, which is probably most people. I was sort of living merrily along, living my life. I was in my late 40s. I had, you know, I guess what you would describe, what most people in a, you know, capitalist Western democracy would describe as a good life. You know, I had a good job that I enjoyed. I had a loving family. I had been, you know, reasonably successful in business by, you know, defining that by my own parameters. Was, you know, I garnered a few trappings of success, and life was, you know, inverted commas, pretty good. And then, you know, in short, I woke up one morning to the news that my eldest son, Charlie, had taken his own life, and it was a complete shock. And it's like, you know, someone switching the lights off, complete, you know, punch in the face. And everything just that I knew was normal and stable in my life just kind of got kicked up in the air. And that whole period is a bit of a, well, I say it's a blur. I can remember things very, very intently, but it was quite a chaotic period. And, you know, I'm blessed with 3 other children. And somehow out of that, I just realized unconsciously almost that I had a choice to make, and, you know, about how I lived the rest of my life. I made some quite dramatic changes fairly quickly. People always say I went against a lot of the advice. You know, they say, "Oh, don't make any rash decisions. Look after yourself." So I quit my job, you know, with nothing really to go to. Then, you know, I didn't have any paid up clients. So I set up my own business. Never run my own business before, and, you know, this is the sort of, I'm 4 and a bit years into this, you know, second part of my life. I sort of see it as BC and AD really. And, you know, obviously losing Charlie, it's, I'm on a journey. You know, I've realized that I'm on a healing journey. I'm on a healing journey, and I always will be. And being able to speak about that with people is a massive part of that. And I've actually, it's really great that we're doing this now, and you're writing this wonderful book now. I think you've got a better, certainly from my corner, it's a better chapter than perhaps you would have had 6 months ago, because 6 months ago, pre-COVID, I was in the throes of trying to grow the business, and and I had a message to share, and I had a story, and that's all great. But COVID has given me lots more time to reflect. It's been quite an intense, emotional time. All my grief, actually. So I talk about what happened 4.5 years ago, and then I threw myself into this business that I've been running for 4 years as a coach. And actually, if I'm really honest, and I've not said this publicly yet, the business I've been running has been as much therapy for me as it has trying to help other people. I've realized that I kind of needed it. So I've sort of, taken stock of a lot of that. But I've realized that conversations and connection and being able to talk about, not only what happened, but being able to talk about that is a massive, massive part of that healing. Hugely.
Yeah.
And always will be.
Yeah, definitely. I obviously very much appreciate you for sharing, because obviously all our authors have said we had a very challenging life, but to lose a child, I can't imagine. So we really appreciate you and hold you in a space of gratitude for being really open and coming on tonight to talk about it. But it very much is a theme, obviously, in all the chapters about just actually starting to really share what you're feeling, and Maria's chapter, actually, because Maria's had quite a journey, which you will discover in the chapters when you read them. But very much it's kind of in a way fascinating how this whole time of lockdown has given us time to reflect, and obviously mental health is coming up often, as it must. So what would be, obviously, having had your experience, what would be your advice as a parent to we're talking earlier about the students, what would you be able to offer as a sort of support to people that are awake?
I always try, I'm always really careful with advice, because what obviously works for one, and for me, one thing I've learned is there's no script with grief, particularly. There's no script, and everyone's different. What I would say is, and I was listening to Steve and Kapil earlier, fortunately or unfortunately, I think, and I do think women are generally better at this than men. Sometimes you've got to be brave enough to go first. So if you, wherever you are, really, whether you're living on your own, student, whoever you are, but or carrying something, struggling with something, I often find if you're brave enough to go, if you can create a safe environment, context for people to open up in, and sometimes that does mean going first. And I talk about this in my chapter. There's a bravery to it, because to actually, for me as a male, to open up on my feelings to another male that I might not know, without guarantee of that being reciprocated, is pretty scary. It's pretty scary. But actually, to Kapil's point, when you do get it back, is immensely powerful, and I just find that so if you are the other party, it's the questions you ask people. So sometimes whatever somebody is struggling with or carrying, and I'm going to relate this back to myself because it's all I know really, is sometimes there's a tendency that sometimes people want to cheer you up. We have this thing about, I don't know if it's a British thing, but oh, come on, let's all have a cup of tea and it'll all be all right, and let's cheer ourselves up. That's great, and I'm sure the intention is wonderful, but sometimes you've got to go there. You've got to go to the scary places. And I found, particularly with suicide bereavement, nobody really wants to go there. So with mental health, this is really interesting for me. There's loads of stuff out there at the moment about mental health, quite rightly, and not before time. Suicide specifically, or suicidal thoughts, or that, if we go into that area, like I'm struggling, as well as the sort of, notwithstanding potential stigma around that. Everyone's happy to talk about that and be kind and all that sort of stuff until it happens. When something happens, when there's an event, you know, suicide is a really funny word. You know, people don't like to talk about it, and I find in my life that if I speak about, back to going first, if I speak about Charlie, sometimes I see relief in people's faces, like, oh, he's talking about it. Oh, great, that means I can talk about it. Or they move on quickly. They want to change the subject, but nobody actually asks me often. A few will, perhaps people that know me more closely, but it's because unlike what I'm going to call natural grief, natural bereavement, where people after a period of time can reflect on what a great person they were. Do you remember this when we did that? Do you remember that? With suicide bereavement, people are very, very sensitive. And I think a lot of it starts with education. It starts with educating people to say, look, it's okay. I could talk about Charlie all day. I could do you like an hour on Charlie now, you know, and it's okay. But I think so sometimes it's one person that's being brave enough to go first and open up the conversation. And so for example, being really specific, I like questions like when I first meet someone, hey, tell me what you're passionate about, as a conversation starter, as opposed to what do you do?
What do you do? Yeah.
Or where are you from?
Question.
Because what do you do? You know, you could be a teacher, lawyer, accountant, author. Great, you know, and we might find some common ground. But what you're passionate about opens up, you know, a real Pandora's box. And for some people, it can throw them a bit, and it's a little bit too heavy, and that's okay. Or if they already know what's happened, or they've had some brief, you know, asking them, hey, what's your story? Or what's going on for you right now? Just getting in something a little bit specific. Sometimes it's almost like diving quite deep into the pond quite quickly. You might only get one little anecdote, but it's a better way to start a conversation because sometimes when we start on a shallow level, we never get deep, and the signal that comes out to the other person is maybe, okay, this is the context. Then this is what we're going to do. Okay, we're going to talk about this because that's safe. So it's that bravery to, you know, which Kapil's doing in his group wonderfully, you know, and you're creating a framework. So yeah.
So it is about setting that bar high, isn't it? Of lets you really, and someone has to go first. And Kapil mentions that in his chapter. You know, someone has to go first. I love the anecdote that you both talk about. You know, putting down your shield. Mark, you talk about that in your chapter. You've got to put down your shield to be brave, and I love that because sadly, the mentality, you know, in so many cultures and ours in the UK, is that to be brave you need a shield. And actually, you know, one of the chapters, and Laurel Ron's chapter, she writes very much with mythology. And I'm going to ask Maria a bit about her chapter in a second, but it's very much about being brave is putting down the shield, not holding it. But it's amazing, and thank you again for sharing your story. You know, we send you blessings in your family, and it must be hard all the time, I should imagine, but to talk about it so openly is really appreciated. It's wonderful that you've taken, you know, this into your work, because like you say, and I know actually all of us in a way are using our experience to do what we are doing with the view of helping others as a purposeful path in our work. So Maria is also in coaching and actual spiritual alignment and opening up to bigger messages that come into us, and I don't want to go too much into that without her sharing, but you very much talk also, Maria, about being open and actually sort of finding the right person to share the conversation with, because a lot of people get therapy and they get help and they tick boxes, but unless you're in that right environment with the right person who's not going to stay in those shallow conversations, then actually, sadly, you can be wasting your time and or money, can't you? It's important to find these right spaces, which you eventually did, which helped you, didn't you?
Yes.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about how you kind of dealt with your own processes and eventually found the right place?
Yes. So, thank you. Thank you so much, Mark. I'm very touched to hear your story.
You're welcome.
Bless you. So I was born into the Chilean dictatorship, and I lost my father to, he was tortured and killed by that regime. So then we came to England when I was young. And so I've had grief all of my life and those horrible feelings. And I've been in therapy since I was 14 years old. I'm now 47 years old. And there are good types of therapy and there are not good types of therapy. So the thing that I've discovered that is very unhelpful is when any kind of therapist or spiritual teacher or popular positive psychologist says, you just need to let this thing go now. And for me, from the soul's perspective, that is a spiritual violence. It's so disrespectful to the soul and the part of the journey that the soul is on, because there is a reason why that thing is there and it's not ready to let go yet. It's like a wound that is nowhere near healing. And so through all of that journeying, I've discovered that the biggest problem and obstacle to the heart and to emotional wellness is denial, which is being fine. It's very prevalent in this culture, but actually in my culture of South America, they're just as codependent. You know, it's just as much looking good. So, like you said, Mark, to put down the shield and to be vulnerable, to come out of denial takes an ego death. And who wants to do that? Not many people do, because it's ugly. It doesn't make me popular. It's just there's nothing good about it. There's nothing enrolling. There's nothing sexy about it. But I always choose to do that because that, I know, is the instant access to my heart and to me feeling that I have not betrayed myself. And to not betray myself and to myself be true is the absolute freedom. Because then it's miraculous how quickly the thing turns around. Actually, it can be within a minute of just being radically honest. This is how I feel. It's really shit and I hate everybody and it's not fair and I hate God and everyone can go away. Well, if that's my God's honest truth in that moment, then that is sacred. And I really honour that. I honour that. So just to see something as it really is, without the labels, without the judgments, is to turn denial into divinity, because underneath all of that pain is just light.
No,
And that's what, in fact,
thank you for sharing.
That's just so important, isn't it, that we stop this craziness of shallow questioning, shallow answering. Cheer up. I mean, what a ridiculous, if you think about it, how ridiculous. Or, and I'm like you've just said, Mark, you've had a mixed response to people who want to help. That's the sad thing, isn't it? People probably want to help, but actually they don't want to face what you're going to be telling them, and that's obviously about their own journey and their own path.
Yeah, some people are. You're absolutely right, and thank you again for sharing that, Maria. It's really, I'm sure there's more to that story, and it's really heartwarming to hear you say that. And I think, I had the is it Kubler-Ross model explained to me, and you go through this phase and that phase, and I read a couple of books, and I thought I can have all 5 of those in about 20 minutes, you're right. And it can happen minute by minute. I really relate to that. In fact, 10 minutes before this tonight, I started feeling really emotional, not connected, nothing connected with what we're doing tonight. Just one of those days. It's like a little tide that goes up and down. And today's been quite emotional. So if I was, if I was more commercially minded, if I was sort of preparing a day for, what day am I going to go on social media and talk about? I wouldn't have picked today, if I was trying to, actually it's probably the best day, because this is just how I'm feeling. I'm a bit 4 out of 10 today, and maybe tomorrow I'll be 8 out of 10, but that's always in pursuit of the light. Yeah. And some days, the dark is a little bit the shadow comes in. And I've learned, and actually COVID, one of the lessons I've learned through COVID is that I need to embrace, is that denial you talk about, is embrace the dark and take and feel it, embrace it and pain it, not try and make it go away, not try and push it. And up until recent, I've always been a bit of a doer, so I throw myself into things. And COVID sort of knocked out 80% of my business revenues overnight. So suddenly I've got lots of time on my hands, which is not good. In my world, that's like, oh, grief, time to reflect, time to think, time to go in on oneself. And, but actually by seeing, and in the end, I've reached out for help, and I thought, this is bigger than me. And I really, and it wasn't even, I didn't even feel depressed, but I just felt this overwhelming sense of grief. And I actually engaged the services of a spiritual healer and opened up that side of me for the first time in my life, age 52. And it's been absolutely amazing. And as always, it's for me to do the work. There's no magic pill, but it's been really, really enlightening and helped me an enormous amount. Yeah.
Well, that's fantastic, and fantastic you could find the person that really allowed that to happen for you, because it is really important. I think we need to discover, and I know Kapil's, you've gone down some slightly different paths with your healing and your journey, haven't you, to find the place where you're at, but that's enabled you to pass that on now to other people that you coach. So
yeah, I think. Yeah, I think, we're all, the way I see it is like there's different modalities that there's different doors that you can open to get to the same place ultimately. There is, it's fascinating what Maria was talking about, and Mark, what you're talking about. The way I see it is that there is a path of detachment, which is usually, in spirituality, if you look at it, there's like a horizontal plane and a vertical plane. And a horizontal plane is where most people live, which is doing the same thing, like doing different things, but having the same experience. So it's like, okay, I want some joy in my life, so I'll go and buy a new car, a new house, a new partner, whatever it is. It's like, but we go sideways, which is the horizontal path. But on the vertical path, what happens is there's a reverence path, which is like spiritual, which is like more a path of detachment that a lot of people take instead of going into the feelings. And then there is a path which is what in spiritual terms people talk about, the left-handed path, which is where you actually you come back down to earth, you go into your feelings, you go into your fears and shame and all your shadow, which is like looking at our subconscious mind to get power. And one of my spiritual teachers used to talk about this, that ultimately on that vertical path, both points on the top and the bottom are actually pointing to the same thing, which is whatever you want to call it, freedom, awakening, enlightenment, and people take different paths, so my path was definitely going into my body, learning about sort of my feelings and emotions and sensitivity, and living my life from that place. And I find that very rewarding because it allows me to stay on this planet, not detached from it, rather than being in the mountaintop in a cave separating myself. Like, I quite like living in this world, and I find that that's what it allows me to be present and be fully me. Another thing my teacher used to say was that heartbreak is the place where we most feel alive. And because when you go through a heartbreak, it's like you're fully open, you're so sensitive that you can feel life as it's happening all over you. And we often shy away from heartbreak or suppress it. However, like if we embrace that heartbreak. It's there's no other sort of feeling of really being alive. So I've kept those things, you know, and I try and practices as much as I can. Not that I keep seeking heartbreaks.
Glad to hear that. Hope Mrs. Gupta is very happy at the moment with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. I think, you know, sadly, obviously, there's a common theme with the chapters. You know, sadly, everyone has been to a point that is particularly low. But I think it's probably the same analogy that actually by reaching that lowest point that you feel, and Maria describes it as literally shattering, don't you? And I love that word, where you just feel like you've shattered. But actually that helps you to suddenly define who you really are, and also connect with parts of you that you almost didn't know existed. So we haven't given Steve much of a talk, and he's been very patient there. And Steve is Steve, I know I'm just going to mention the one part that actually Mark mentioned, and I know is a big part of your message, is the different values of the old you, the depressed you, and now the new you, because obviously you are a motivational speaker who now uses your story as part of your message. That
kind of, yeah. I got told off of the week for talking too much, so I thought I'd listen tonight. So I'm a lapsed Catholic, right? So just before we move on to that, and this beautiful description of spirituality there, Kapil, right? I could never have described it in that way. And Mark, again, you were talking about, you know, looking at the spiritual side. So if I was looking at it from a practical, I've got 2 points really, which is this. If we're not careful, it could sound like this is just a book about misery and it's, we're all down. Oh, it's all about, you know, tree hugging and spirituality. I'm not knocking spirituality. Do you know what I mean? No. So my thing is to say, of course, to see the light, you've got to see the dark, you know. So in Mark's case, but what struck me, Mark, with you was, and I think this is where as you quite rightly say, who are we to give you advice? Every case is different. We can only talk it from our own perspective. But I think I'm safe in saying that you wouldn't be doing what you're doing now other than what happened in your life with your son, you know. So you said you're meant to take, you know, everybody says don't make rash decisions, and you started a whole new business. You never run your own business before, and now you're getting into spirituality and all sorts of things you would never, you would just have been running on that plane until this terrible, at the time, terrible thing. Well, that was similar to me, really. So in my chapter, I talk about the old me, which is pretty up, a motivational speaker, right? And then the kind of depressed me and the new me. And I don't know if you've got to the point of forgiveness now with this, if that's the right word, Mark, where you can look back and go, well, I can't change that, but it's made me a better person, right? Well, in my case, the new me, I definitely am a better version of what I thought was quite a good guy before. Right, because of what happened to me with my mental health, and it took quite a bit of hindsight to do that. And whether you call that being more spiritual, whatever word you want to attach to it, right? More caring, more kind, more grateful, all those big words. And I think the other thing I would say is that people who are right in the midst of a terrible time with their mental health or something has happened in their life that's challenging. It's hard to find the humor, right? But I actually think there's humor in all this. It might need hindsight, and even in suicide, right? So I think it's quite interesting, Matt, that you said you love to talk about your son. Other people might be a bit, you know, wary of that, but why would you want to? I mean, obviously nearer to them, but now I bet you could, as you said, you could talk about it for an hour. Why not? And the fun things and the great things, right? So I think we've got to be careful that there will be some, hopefully people will be get a little smile and a little chuckle at this and recognise they are that bloke. Yeah, I act like that. You know, I am that guy who says, yeah, I'm fine when I'm not. And I think that's the thing, that there is lightness and shade, and it is appropriate to have a laugh at this being human and all that involves. That'd be my message, I think.
Yeah,
I love that. I think the ability to have humor is actually quite a I would say spiritually advanced practice.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
You know, because like to go through the you call it dark path or going into our feelings, there's a stage where it just feels so overwhelming. And then after that, the stage comes where we just like look back at ourselves like, oh, that was me. And it's like not laughing at anyone else, but you learn to laugh at yourself. And that is quite an achievement.
Yeah,
For
well, I think
sure.
you can look back at your previous life and go, the things that you thought were important,
Yeah.
you know, when you had that high-powered job or that thing or that car or that money, and it's usually things, isn't it? Or that relationship. And back then you thought, that's it, that was important. And you look back and you go, why was that ever important to me? You know, see, I think the other thing that shifts with all this is your values.
I think it's purpose. Yeah.
Yeah,
what
purpose.
For me there, Steve, is just, you make some great points. I mean, first of all, humor, absolutely. You know, you've got to. I think humor is a huge medicine sometimes, and it's a great stress reliever for in life. And and actually, I think it's great that you mentioned that, actually, because part of those conversations when we were talking earlier, Joe, about asking the right questions and going deep. Part of that is having some light and shade. So I love my best friendships are the ones where 1 minute we're talking about exactly what we're talking about now. The next minute we're talking about something so shallow that and laughing. And that's the beauty, isn't it? Because I think the danger is if you do too much of it would be very easy for us here, the four of us, the five of us, sorry, to be quite dismissive of shallow conversations. Oh, it's all very frivolous, but it has a place, and anything if you do it all the time. So equally, if you're just sitting there, I guess I would probably become that guy very quick. Oh God, don't go and talk to him. He's going to bang on about suicide or something like that. So I think there's light and shade, and what you talked about your previous life. I look forward to, as with all of you, reading your chapters. I think for me, if I had to define it, it was just a change of purpose. Whether I wanted it or not, I had a choice. I talked about that choice, and I thought, right, I can become a victim of this, and I can seek sympathy or solace in whatever substance or wherever I want to go, or I can own it. And I'm going to use another F word now. Forgive me, but owning it is fucking tough, and not without its challenges. But it's for me, it's the again, I wouldn't give people advice, but it's the way to go. And that for me, it was purpose. My old life, actually, to your point, when I look at old me, to Mark before, I look quite fondly at him. I think, Mark, picture then, he was doing his best. He was, made a few, sometimes he was a bit misguided, or he wasn't quite on the right track, or he didn't have but he was doing his best and, what he thought was the right thing. But so it's not that my story is not one of like, oh, that was then. I'm no longer that person. No, not at all. But actually, for me, it's like the layers of an onion. When I was listening to Kapil just now, this ever going vertically, you called it. For me, it's like the layers of an onion. You peel one off, and you've never arrived. You've never sort of reached that Zen moment where you go, "That's it. I've got it. I've worked it out." There's always another layer,
It's a continual journey, isn't it? Continual journey. But I think that there will be a lot of people struggling right now, and I know, and I've just had an article in the paper about it because I get SAD, and I don't like the darkness. I don't like the winter. That's why I need to be in California, but not just
Don't
yet.
we all?
Well, exactly. Yeah, well, you can join me if you like.
Not with all the fires these days.
Well, it's a big state though, Kapil. But there is always something that we can look for and look at and find that light. We need to just be open to the fact there is a light there somewhere, and finding that. Well, what can I do with this time? What could I, as a student maybe, what could I be doing? Writing. I mean, it's a brilliant time to write. I've started writing and publishing in lockdown. I'd never touched authorship or publishing before. So why not write about it? I'd encourage every student to write your experience. The first year at university, the first wonky year at university, write it down, and it's so kind of cathartic and helpful, and it's something to focus on. And before you know it, you may have written a chapter or maybe written a book. Or you could go off the scale and write some kind of crazy novel, whatever what floats your boat. You know, it's
you might not ever show it to anyone. I mean, that doesn't matter either, because there's a lot of
Exactly.
research on journaling and how useful it is. You
Yes.
know, when you look at things like
Yeah.
gratitude, or
Yeah.
you know, if your thing's not writing, you know, you were saying you've not been on social media, Mark, for a while, but if your thing's technology, we've got all these channels to communicate. You know, and this whole thing, I think the whole vulnerable piece and taking these, whether you use a shield as a metaphor or a wall or whatever it is, you know, or a mask, you know, all these things. We are, as I've said before, we are not having the same experience in lockdown, far from it. And I think it's a bit of a generalization again to say we're all going through it together. We're all in it together, because clearly we're not. You know, you might have a match. Somebody's way speak now is in California, right, with a mansion and a swimming pool. However, we are having similar experiences. So I think the real opportunity again is for us all to be prepared to be more vulnerable, because we've been shown as human beings we're vulnerable. Right. Can I just say a big thank you to Dolly Parton at this point in time?
You can always say thank you to Dolly Parton.
Absolutely, you can.
She is a superstar.
I'd like to thank her
that was the, you know, I think, you know, I'm conscious of time. If we want some good news story from today, so the kind of bad news stories, loneliness and depression's no surprise in increasing. But the wonderful Dolly Parton gave $1 million to help develop the vaccine. I just love that. Just think the connection when you talk about fun and you know, purpose. There you go.
Yeah, no, she is amazing. I mean, what an incredible woman. And she's had her own journey, hasn't she?
I know the other thing, Joe, that you'll love as well, she's got this other initiative, which is giving away books. So since I think 1995, I forget how many million books she's put into education and given to schools and kids and stuff. Because her thing, she said, I've never had kids. I don't know if she could have had kids or not, but she just goes, and I love this thinking, right? This is the difference that books can make. All the kids of the world are my kids, is what Dolly said. So I'm going to give them some books. And she's helped develop a vaccine as well. Having said that, I hate country and western, but that's by the by.
She goes beyond her genre.
Yeah,
she's so heart-centered and so compassionate and authentic.
Yeah, and
if you can sell a few million copies of Being Fine, definitely that'll be good.
There's a great series on Netflix by Dolly, and they are based around her songs, and you will be having tears of joy. They are absolutely Dolly's Heartstrings. It's called, and I
just as another final bit of Dolly trivia, the fact they've got, I think she's got her own theme parks as well, hasn't she? I think they're called
Dolly World.
Is it Dolly World? Dollywood. Yeah. So
amazing. Yeah. Well, listen, thank you so much, everyone, for turning up tonight. Thank you so much for everyone listening, watching, wherever you are, whatever you're doing. A very big thank you, first of all, to Mark Pitcher for turning up and coming along and sharing your incredible story. Thank you, Mark. To Steve McDermott in Leeds. I'll get it right one day. Leeds. And Kapil Gupta is definitely in London. Thank you, Kapil, for coming along. Maria, who's next to me.
On the same street.
She lives on my street. Yeah.
She lives on mine.
So we are neighbours, and we're obviously in a bubble because we're clearly not, you know, the official.
We're working.
But we're working together on obviously this book and lots of other things too, which is amazing. So very, very grateful for you guys to come along, and look forward to sharing on our next Facebook Live, which will be next Wednesday. They're every Wednesday at 7, normally half an hour. But today seemed a special time as it's International Men's Day. We are supporting everything that you guys are doing because you're all amazing. You're all doing incredible things to support men. And the book will be out very shortly. So exciting times ahead. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Join our Facebook group at Being Fine Book. And we'd love to keep you in our conversation.
Like and share.
I'm Jo Baldwin-Trott. Like and share. There you go. Thank you, my assistant.
Bye.
I'm Jo Baldwin-Trott, editor of this amazing book, Being Fine. Take care, everyone. Have a lovely evening and great to see you. Thanks for sharing.
Bye.
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 Thank you.